Hey everybody, welcome back to another very exciting episode of the Photoshop Training Hour. I am your host, Jesus Ramirez. It's good to see you here on the chat. I see a lot of familiar faces already. Thank you so much for joining me, Baldeir. As always, it's a pleasure to see you in the chat. I see people from Ghana, Albert from Ghana. Thank you so much for joining me. Let me know in the chat where you're watching from. I'm currently streaming from the beautiful San Francisco Bay Area, and I would love to know where you're streaming from. So in this episode of the Photoshop Training Hour, I'm going to take you through the process of making your vacation photos look amazing. I recently went on a East Coast road trip where I went through a lot of different states and took a lot of photos. I was out in the road for about maybe 18 days or so. And actually, let me share my screen and I can show you a map of more or less the areas that I visited. So as you can see, I started in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I did a loop around the east coast of the U.S. all the way up to New Hampshire and actually Maine, and then west towards Niagara Falls, Cleveland, and back down through West Virginia, back to Raleigh, North Carolina. So the photos that you're going to see today are photos from that specific trip, and this is what we're going to work on. Let me bring up one of our first image that we're going to work on, and we're going to start with this photo shot in Washington, North Carolina. Now, actually, I kind of went a little too fast, so before we get started, let me just quickly mention that this episode of the Photoshop Training Hour is brought to you by our good sponsors at MSI. So thank you so much, MSI, for sponsoring this video. A little later on, I'm going to talk a little bit about the products that I'm currently using, my MSI Creator 15 laptop, the monitor that I'm using, and the desktop that I'm using, all thanks to MSI. So thank you so much, MSI, for sponsoring this video. But let me get back into the photo that we're going to work with today. Now, I should mention a couple things before I get started with the photos. All these images were shot using my Google Pixel phone. I did have my Dslr with me on the trip and I took a lot of photos with that. But for this session, I'm only going to show you photos that I shot with my phone so that you can see that I'm not using a fancy camera or anything like that. That way, you can see that with Photoshop or even Lightroom, you can turn your photos into something amazing. And actually, to be quite frank with you, a lot of the images that you're going to see, I initially edited those photos using the Lightroom mobile app. All the same capabilities that I'm going to show you inside of Camera Raw could be applied using the Lightroom mobile app. So you can use that if you want to. Obviously, in sections where I use layers and masks and things like that, you won't be able to do that with your phone, but anything with Camera Raw that I show, you'll be able to apply with your phone. Let me see if we have any questions in the chat before we get started. I see a lot of people letting me know where they're from. We have Harry from Brooklyn, Video TT from Sweden, Love from India. Thank you so much for watching. We got Yard. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. Yardrick from Jacksonville. So thank you so much for joining me. So this is, as I was saying, a photo shot in Washington, North Carolina, and it's a very average photo. It's sort of a gloomy sunset, but we can definitely make it look more amazing inside of Photoshop. I'm going to apply a stylized effect that should really make the image pop. So let's get started. The first step is to convert your layer into a smart object by right-clicking on it and selecting Convert to Smart Object. A smart object is a container that allows you to apply non-destructive adjustments, distortions, filters, and transformations. In other words, you can always come back and make changes or remove the effect entirely. So that's why you want to convert your layer into a smart object. Then, from the filter menu, you can go into the Camera Raw filter. With the Camera Raw filter, you can have total control of your photos, light and color, and you can apply effects. So we're going to completely change the look of the image to make it look more amazing. Cool. We have James from Olympia, Washington. Thank you so much, James. We have Adveraruf from North Africa, Algeria. Thank you so much. But yeah, so what we're going to do to get started is just work our way down from the Camera Raw filter. On the very top, we have the basic panel that allows us to control the temperature, the exposure, and the texture. As I said before, you can follow along with Lightroom if you want. Lightroom does not have a basic panel. Instead, it breaks the basic panel into two, light and color. So all these sliders are also found in Lightroom, but in two different panels, labeled light for exposure all the way down to blacks, and then color where you have the vibrance and saturation and temperature, and also the color mixer. Again, the layout may be a little bit different, but you can follow along with Lightroom if you want, including the Lightroom mobile app where I originally edited most of these photos. But in the Photoshop training channel, we're just going to use the camera raw filter inside of Photoshop. So the first thing that I'm going to do is just adjust the sliders to control the lighting. If you don't know what to do, you can just simply try hitting the auto button, so you can let the artificial intelligence sort of figure out the best setting for each of the sliders that you see on here. You might get a good result, you may not. Also, here's a quick trick that you may not know. If you click on the auto button again, it'll reset all the sliders. If you're working with an image and you're making an adjustment and then you sort of get stuck and you don't really know what to do with a particular slider, what you can do is hold down the shift key on your keyboard, and that will enable the auto option for that particular slider. So for example, if I don't know how to adjust the shadows slider, I can just hold shift and click and double click, and Photoshop or Camera Raw will apply that automatic adjustments. Basically the same adjustment as clicking on the auto button, but instead of doing a global adjustment where all the sliders get adjusted, you only adjust the one that you click on. So it uses the same artificial intelligence just for that one slider. Again, you can hold the shift key and simply double click on the slider to make that automatic adjustment. So if you get stuck, try it and see what it looks like. In this case, what I'm going to do instead is just hold the Alt key on Windows, that's the Option key on the Mac, and click on this reset button to reset all my sliders. Let me see if there's any questions before we move forward. Alexi Rodriguez is saying, Saludos Jesus. Hey Alexi, how's it going? Cool. Yeah, we have people from all over the world, South Africa, Johannesburg. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. So what I'm going to do is just go down the list. When you're working on Camera Raw, Lightroom, it doesn't really matter. What I like to do is start on top and just work my way down. In this case, let's work with the temperature a little bit. I'm going to create a stylized effect, so I'm going to just increase the temperature just to add a little bit of yellow, and also increase the tint to add a little bit of magenta just to get that purple looking color in the shadows. Then I'm going to increase the contrast just to make the image pop a bit more. Reduce the highlights so that I can get more detail in the clouds up here. And maybe reduce the shadows just to, again, create more contrast in the image and make it more punchy. Then I can use the texture slider to bring out a lot of the detail in the water. You can see that as I drag the texture slider to the right, the detail in the water comes out. So I really want those waves to pop, so I can increase the texture slider. Then I can increase clarity, which is contrast in midtones, again, making the image punchier and popping more, which is what I want. And I can increase the vibrance. Vibrance is a smart way of adding saturation. It protects already saturated pixels in skin tones. In this case, we don't have any skin tones, so we don't have to worry about it. And I can just increase the saturation of pixels that are low, that have low saturation. In this case, pretty much all the pixels, since there's not much saturation. So just a tiny little bit should do. You can click on this icon to see the before, and click again to see the after. I think I may want a little more magenta just to add more purple in there. I just want that stylized effect. And what I'm going to do now is work a little bit on the rotation of the image. And to do so, I'm just going to rotate the photo using the crop tool. So with the crop tool active, I can click on this drop down and just select width and height and resolution, and actually escape out of that, so that way I get the full crop and I don't actually crop the image. And what I want to do is click on this icon here to enable the straighten tool, and then I can click and drag and follow the horizon line, and Photoshop will automatically straighten that line. So whatever line you draw over the image, Photoshop will just rotate it and straighten it for you if you want. If you wanted to crop this image to a specific aspect ratio, maybe you wanted to create an Instagram story out of it, then you can certainly make an adjustment, select one of the presets, for example 16:9, and then click on this icon to swap the aspect ratio, so it's 9:16 now, and this could be the same, and this is the same aspect ratio for an Instagram story, for example. And you can just click and drag the image accordingly until you have a composition that looks good to your eye. I'm going to click on the check mark to commit the changes. And actually, that was not that good of a crop. I have a little bit of white here at the bottom, so I'm just going to crop it in just a tiny bit more, like so, and maybe move it to the left. I just want that this structure here to be right on that third so that it creates more interest. So I have this structure here, this item here, so it creates sort of like a triangle, and I kind of like my eyes kind of lead to this item first, then here. So it creates sort of like this V shape, almost like a triangle if you look back down. But anyway, so that's what I like, and I can click on this icon, and this is the before and the after. And as you can see, just by making a few adjustments, you can get a really cool effect. And actually, if you want to, you can even take this a step further. Remember, this is a smart object, so this is why we converted the layer into a smart object, so that we can always change it. So with the camera raw filter label, you can always double click on that, and it will bring up the filter once again. And you can even add a radial filter. You can click and drag like so, click on this icon to reset the filter, and then maybe increase the temperature to make it yellow, maybe add a little bit of magenta as well. And this is just the sunlight that is coming from the sun back here. Maybe increase the exposure just a little bit and press OK. And that is the change there that you can see before and after. You can spend as much time as you want making these adjustments to just make that image become even more beautiful. You can get creative if you want to. In this case, I just wanted to introduce you to some of these tools, and we're gonna take it a step further with the following images. But before I do that, let me take a quick look at the chat to see if there's any questions. Let me see here. We have people from Congo. Good to see you. We have Panos from Greece. Thank you so much for joining me. Joe from Coral Springs, Florida. Awesome. Which mobile is used? I use my Google Pixel phone. This phone right here, Google Pixel. Seems to work on JPEG and RAW as well. I'm not really sure what you mean by that, but yeah, the camera raw filter does work on your JPEG images, and obviously on your raw images, you're going to use the camera raw plugin, not necessarily the filter, but they're basically the same, just a few differences. Cool. We have Thierry from Martinique in the French Caribbean. Nice, good to see you, Thierry. What is a stylized effect? Stylized effect just means that it's something that's not really realistic. I'm adding a lot of contrast, I'm adding colors. I'm essentially telling a story with the colors and the adjustments that I make. I'm not necessarily trying to go for something realistic per se. I'm just enhancing the image with these different techniques so that they take a style that is not necessarily realistic, but it still makes the image look better, at least to my eyes. So it's subjective, of course, but that's more or less what stylized means. Cool. We have people from California, nice, Amsterdam. What is a raw photo? Good question. What is a raw photo? So currently I'm using JPEG images. These images are images that have already been developed and compressed by my phone, and I'm taking them into into Photoshop so I can edit those photos. So the key part of that statement is images that were already developed and compressed. In other words, it's losing a lot of the original data in the image, and the phone is applying adjustments when the photo is taken. A raw photo is something that you would take, you can do it with your phone and if you wanted to with the Lightroom mobile app, but generally speaking, a raw photo is something that you would shoot, for example, with an SLR with the raw settings if your camera allows it. And those photos have not been compressed and they have not been processed. So the file sizes tend to be much larger, but that allows you to have more control and more flexibility of how you edit the photos. A JPEG image, since it's compressed, it's a lot smaller in terms of file size, much smaller, But since you lose all that information, you have less control of how you can adjust the image because there's not that much information that you can edit. And that is just an oversimplification of the raw and compressed images. Cool. Can we create the same effect using curves? Yeah, you can definitely create the same effect using curves. I'm not really going to go into that into the entire process since we got to move on. But if you wanted to create the same effect with curves, you can just select one of these channels. For example, in this case, a green channel, and maybe reduce the green a little bit and see how I'm adding magenta. So the way that the curves works is that you'll notice this center line, this white center line right here. See that center line there? If you add a point above that line, you add light. If you drag a point below that line, you take away light and make the image darker. In the case of the channels red, green, and blue, if you click and drag up, you'll add more color in the light of that channel. And so in this case, red. If we drag up, we're going to add red. If you drag down, you subtract the light of that channel. So you'll get the opposite color of that channel's color. The opposite of red is cyan. So when I click and drag down, I'll get cyan. See that? So with green, dragging up gives me green, dragging down gives me magenta. And with blue, dragging up gives you blue, and dragging down gives you yellow. So if you wanted to get something like what I just got, then I would select the green channel, drag down just a little bit to add a little bit of magenta, and then go back into the RGB composite and maybe create an S curve or something like that, and you get a similar effect. And obviously you can fine tune it so that it looks the way that you want, but that's more or less how the curves adjustment layer works. Cool. Oh yeah, sorry about that, guys. I didn't switch over to the screen. So whoopsie daisy. Thank you for letting me know there, letting me know. So I'll explain that again. Sorry about that. So with the curves adjustment layer, you have the RGB composite, and there's this line here in the center. You see this line here in the center? If you drag up above that line, you'll add light, and if you drag below that line, you'll subtract light, making the image darker. In the case of the channels, if you drag up above that light, you're going to get more light of that color of the channel that you're in. And if you drag down, you're going to subtract the color of the channel that you're in, and you're going to get the opposite color. So in this case, when you drag above the line, you'll get red. If you drag down, you get cyan. And with green, you get green if you drag up, and magenta if you drag down. With blue, you get blue, of course, when you drag up, and yellow when you drag down. So if you wanted to get a similar effect to what I have here had before using the filter, then you can select the green channel and drag down slightly to get that magenta look that I had, and maybe even drag down with the blue just to add a little bit of yellow, because I did warm up the image, if you remember, with the temperature slider. So I'm kind of doing the same thing by dragging down on the blue channel. And then I can go to the RGB composite and create what's known as an S curve. An S curve is a curve that sort of looks like an S, because we are making the highlights brighter by dragging up from this point, and then the shadows darker by dragging down from this point. And you can see that this almost has the shape of an S. If I exaggerate it, then you can see the S a little more clearly. But anyway, so I'm just creating an S curve, and it kind of gives you the look that I had before. And like I was saying earlier, you can continue fine-tuning this curve to make it more to make it look the way that you want it to. But anyway, you can definitely create all these effects using all these different tools inside of Photoshop. In this case, we use the camera raw filter since it's a little bit easier to use. You're just dragging sliders left and right, and it gives you total control of the tonality in your photo. Cool. Let me see if there's any other questions. Thank you so much, Max, for your comment. You're welcome. Herman, the question is, if the raw file in a phone, is it the same quality as a DSLR camera? Absolutely not. A camera, most modern cameras or SLR cameras, modern SLR cameras are going to give you much better images than the raw files on your phone, simply because the lens on your phone is this tiny little thing, and an SLR camera will probably have a much better lens. So that's one of the reasons. There's many other reasons as to why, but you'll definitely get better quality with a camera rather than the raw image on your phone. But the raw image on your phone will be better than, I hate using the word better. Well, how can I say this? The raw image on your phone will have more information than the JPEG image on your phone, and you can manipulate it more, which may give you better images. But yeah, cool. Okay, let's move on to the next photo. Let me close this one. I'm not going to save it, and I'm going to go to File and Open, and I'm going to, let's work on this one for now, because I want to show you something different. By the way, right now I had the crop tool active, and I didn't want it active, so I just pressed the escape key. The escape key is like a really useful keyboard shortcut that you can use in Photoshop to just escape out of whatever you have active. So in this case, I had the crop tool active, and I just pressed the escape key, and now it's not active anymore. But anyway, so what I'm going to do now is, again, right click on the image, convert it into a smart object because we want to work non-destructively. And I'm going to go into Filter, Camera, Raw Filter. And this is obviously a photo of the Empire State sign there that I took, again, with my phone. And basically, what I want to do is I just want to remove the perspective from this sign. The perspective is just, that's a really tall sign, and I was sort of looking up, taking a picture with my phone like this, and I just want to remove the perspective and maybe again stylize the image so that it pops and it looks better. And one of the things that you can do to remove the perspective or work with perspective in Photoshop is by using the geometry tab in Camera Raw. And you can just try simply clicking on the A for auto and see what happens. And in this case, it does a good job, but I think it's fun using the guided tool so you can do it manually. So when you click on this button, what you can now do is click and drag over the image, and you can follow the horizontal and vertical lines. So in this case, I'll follow the vertical lines of the sign like so. And what Photoshop will do is straighten those lines. So if you remember, they were at an angle when I was following the edges, but when I create two and release, Photoshop just straightens those two lines. And I can do the same thing with the horizontal lines. So I can come in here and I can click and drag over this horizontal line, and I can do the same thing here at the bottom. And I've essentially removed the perspective from the image. Now, if I wanted to, I could just press, I'll show you, I'll press OK. And I can come in here and crop the image, right? And once I crop the image, that's what the image looks like, and it looks fantastic. Another thing that you can do if you wanted to, let me undo that by pressing Control-Z on Windows, Command-Z in the Mac, is go back into Camera Raw, and you can also use the scale feature, and you can scale that in to remove the transparent pixels, and then just offset the image either horizontally or vertically. In this case, I can maybe just offset it vertically a little bit, something like that. And I can press OK. And I don't necessarily have to crop the image. You can just scale it and offset it. It depends on the result that you're looking for. I just wanted to give you a different alternative than just cropping the image because we looked at cropping in the previous example. Cool. And yeah, this is Photoshop. This is not Lightroom. This is I've been using the camera raw filter inside of Photoshop, which is very similar to Lightroom. Essentially, Lightroom was created by using the engine inside of camera raw, so it's basically the same thing. Obviously, there's differences in the programs, but in terms of editing the photo and the sliders and all of that, it's pretty much the same program. So you're not going to see a lot of differences when it comes to editing the photo, just in features beyond that. Cool. Awesome. Let's see. So something else that I want to do in this particular image is, again, stylize it. Why not? We're going to stylize it. So I'm going to click on the camera raw label. And again, I guess I can explain what stylize means. In this case, if I just increase the contrast just a little bit and maybe reduce the shadows and maybe reduce the highlights, I can say that this is not really stylized. I'm only making it a little bit brighter, a little bit darker in some areas, adding a little bit of contrast so it pops more, but essentially this is more or less what the image looked like in the real world when I took the photo. Stylizing it means that I'm going to make it look different than reality for artistic purposes. So one way of stylizing it is by just increasing the texture just so that it pops a lot more. This image has a lot of detail, as you can see, and by increasing the texture, you can really bring that detail out. May not necessarily be realistic, but I think it looks better. I can increase the vibrance just to make the yellow pop more. And talking about color, something that we can do is go into the color mixer. I'm sorry, not the color mixer, the color grading tool. And from the color grading tool, we can target the shadows, midtones, and highlights and apply a color to each of those tones. In this case, I can just click on this shadows circle, and here we are, we have the shadows. And you can also expand this arrow so that you can have access to the sliders. You can make adjustments by clicking and dragging over the circle here, but I think it's much more intuitive if you use the sliders. So that's what we'll do for this example. So first I'll select the color that I want in the shadows, and I want a blue color in the shadows because notice that we have a lot of yellow here. So I want the yellow to contrast with the blue so that the yellow pops. And if you notice here in the color wheel, we have blue on one side, yellow on the other. So it's sort of like a complementary color. And when you put complementary colors side by side, they pop. So I want to have a blue teal in the shadows so that the yellow pops even more. So once I've selected the blue that I want, I can increase the saturation and see that? See how I've added the blue on the shadows? And I can also adjust the luminance. In other words, how dark those shadows will be with the blue. And I know that this is an extreme effect, and that's okay. I'm doing it so that I can see what I'm affecting. What I can now do is adjust the balance. And if I drag to the right, you'll see that Photoshop will consider less colors shadow, and if I drag to the left, Photoshop will consider more colors shadows. So I need to fine tune this accordingly so that I can get the right balance between what is a shadow and what isn't. And once I've found something that works, I can now reduce the saturation and just determine exactly how much blue I want in those shadows. So maybe something like this. And this is the before, and this is the after. I can also go into my color mixer, and from my color mixer, I can select these colors here. And right now I'm under HSL. This is how it used to look before the 2020 update. But if I just select color, I like working with this better. This is the same way that you'll see it in Lightroom, not Lightroom Classic. The Lightroom Cloud version looks like this, and that's the look that I prefer. And basically, it allows me to select the color like oranges, and I can now control the hue, saturation, and luminance of that color that I selected. So I can increase the saturation and maybe adjust the orange to look a little more yellow, and then select the yellow and make it more orange, increase the saturation as well. And I can also work with the blues, maybe saturate the blues more. And you can have as much fun as you want adjusting these colors. In this case, to be frank with you, I probably took it a little too far. I would probably push back a little bit on the colors, but I wanted the adjustments to be obvious for the stream. So I probably would reduce the saturation a lot on this, and probably even go into the basics and maybe reduce the vibrance as well, since I think it might be a little too strong, and maybe increase contrast a little bit, maybe something like that, and press OK when I'm done. And you can see the before and the after by clicking on this eye icon. So again, these, in my opinion, these minor adjustments will take your everyday average cell phone shot and just make it look amazing by clicking on a few, by dragging a few sliders and clicking on a few options inside of Camera Raw. Let me see if there's any other questions. Can you use the Camera Raw filter with a PSD file? Yes, you can use the Camera Raw filter with any layer inside of Photoshop, of course. And to clarify, you could also use the Camera Raw plugin from Bridge on a PSD file or anything that you want. Cool. Let me see if there's... Thank you so much for joining, everybody. I'm just trying to read through all the comments just so that I don't miss anything, or maybe the audio's bad, or I'm not sharing my screen like earlier. Cool. Awesome. So again, I'm not going to save this image. I'm just going to open up another photo. And in this case, let me see what time it is. Actually, we're about halfway through the stream. So before I continue, what I would like to mention is our sponsor. Our sponsor is MSI Computers. I am the user of their Creator 15 laptop. The Creator 15 laptop is a laptop that I use for all my presentations when I do them live, or now that I was traveling, I took this laptop with me everywhere, and I was editing the photos that I shot with my SLR camera through this laptop. It has a 4K display, true color technology, 100% Adobe RGB. It's Kalman certified. It's a fantastic laptop. The link to this laptop is in the description. The MSI Creator 15 is the laptop that I'm currently using, although I'll be upgrading to the Creator 16 probably by next week. But Creator 15 is a laptop that I'm using at this moment. Also, I'm streaming this stream using this desktop, the Aegis Ti15. It's a really powerful computer. It almost looks like a spaceship. It's really cool looking, and as you can see, it's very powerful, and it's the computer that I use to edit all my images while I'm working here on my desk on desktop. And the monitor that I'm currently using, that's the monitor here to my right, is a Creator PS321QR. It's got Adobe RGB at 99%, DCI P3 at 95%, and 99% sRGB. It's a fantastic monitor. Again, the link to the monitor, the desktop, and the laptop are in the description, so check those out. So let me switch back into my screen, and let's get back to editing in Photoshop. Let's do this. I'll leave the image that I used for the thumbnail of the photo for a little later on, but now why don't we take a look at this image here. And this is an image of a photo that I shot of an old-fashioned, this is a bar in New York City, and I don't know about you guys, but I'm a big fan of old fashions. I don't know why, I just like them a lot. So I ordered a whole bunch of old fashions during this trip. And I took a photo of this using my phone, using the portrait mode, which is what gave me that blurry background. And I wanted to make this into a more appealing image to post on social media. And one of the things that happens when you work with Camera Raw, and I'll show you what the issue is. If I select an image and convert it into a smart object, and then I decide that I want to crop it for social media, the issue that happens is that when I take it into Camera Raw, I'll see the entire photo. See that? See how the entire photo comes back? And if I want to apply things like a vignette, it doesn't really work as well because the darkening effect starts back here and not necessarily here on the edges. So what I recommend that you do in a situation like that is to first do the crop. So with the crop tool selected, I'm just going to do my crop, and I'm going to place this more or less where I want it. And if I need to rotate it, I can rotate it. I can also use the straighten tool if I wanted to straighten this image. Whatever you need to do it now. Place it wherever it needs to go. Very important. Make sure that delete crop pixels is unchecked. You don't want to delete pixels. You just want to crop the canvas. And now that I have this more or less where I want it, and actually let me even crop it more and move it more, maybe something like this. I think that's good. Once you have the crop that you want, here's the trick. Press Control A on Windows, Command and the Mac to make a selection out of your canvas. Then click on the layer mask icon to create a layer mask. Nothing's going to change. Everything's still the same. We just created a layer mask that reveals basically everything in the canvas. Everything outside the canvas is now hidden, and we can't really see that because we have the layer that is the same size as the canvas. But if I select the move tool by pressing the V key, when I move the canvas, you can see that in fact the layer mask is hiding the pixels outside of the canvas. If I hold the shift key and click on the layer mask thumbnail, you can see that those pixels are still there. I'm not deleting them. So what I can do is just place the layer back where it was. And if I have trouble doing that, I can just press the Z key to undo until I move it back into place. But anyway, the layer mask is still there. Now, if I create a smart object now and go into Filter, Camera Raw Filter, you will notice that I am now editing the image with that crop. And I didn't lose the pixels. The pixels are still inside of the smart object, so I can bring them back if I needed to. But the point is that sometimes when you apply the Camera Raw Filter on a layer, you will get all the pixels in that layer. By creating a layer mask that is the same size as the canvas, when you apply the Camera Raw, or convert it into a smart object, and then apply the Camera Raw Filter, you will get a crop that just shows you what's inside of that layer mask. So that is the trick. I'll do that again just because I feel like I made that a little too confusing. So let me show you again what the problem is with this image. If I were to rotate this image like so, and then I were to crop the image like so, and I wanted to just edit that, convert it into a smart object like so. If I go into Filter, Camera Raw, you'll notice the issue. It'll be much more obvious now. See that? See how I have all this transparency? You don't want that. So to avoid that, press Control A on Windows, Command A on the Mac to create a selection around the canvas. Click to add a layer mask. Now right click, convert it into a smart object. And if I go into Filter, Camera Raw Filter, will now work with the cropped version of that image. See that? So that is the trick there. So let me undo that and get back to where we were. I think we were here. Control A, add a layer mask, convert to smart object, and now we can apply the Camera Raw Filter. So Filter, Camera Raw Filter. Cool. Now, what we can do is just work with this image. Again, I'm going to stylize it. I'm going to cool the image. I'm going to maybe add a little bit of magenta contrast to make it pop more. I'm going to increase the highlights. I really want these specular highlights to stick out. Reduce the shadows a little bit. Increase the texture because I really want the texture in the eyes and the glass and all of that to pop. Increase the clarity as well. See that? See how it just makes everything pop even more. Very stylized, but I think it looks cool. This image is already very saturated, so I don't think I need to saturate it that much, just maybe a tiny little bit. And what I'm going to do now is go into the effects panel and just add a little bit of a vignette. But this is the thing, when you add a vignette, notice how we darken the edges. I want to darken the edges, but I don't want to hide the highlights. To do that, after you create your vignette, you can just increase the highlight slider. And if you don't see the highlight slider, just make sure that you click on this arrow here and you'll see the extra options for the vignette. And notice what happens with the highlights. See that? At 0, the vignette hides the highlights. And if I increase this to 100, the highlights, like the white areas, just pop through the vignette. And that's what I want. So I can adjust this accordingly, maybe something like this. And I can reduce the vignette. That's a little too strong. So maybe something like so. About 30 or so. And I think the image is looking great, but the problem is that the drink itself is not looking very appetizing. So maybe I could just focus on the drink. I can create a radial filter and then just create a circle right about there. I'll reset it and I can increase the exposure, maybe the texture a little bit, and maybe the saturation, something like that. And just keep adjusting it until it looks good to your eye. Obviously, you can spend as much time as you want. And I can press OK. And there it is. Before and after. You can adjust it as much as you want. If you really want to start adding more lighting effects, what you can do is create a new layer. Select the brush tool. Paint with white. And I'm just going to paint with white like so. Just create these highlights. But I want them to become really strong specular highlights. And to do that, I can change the blending mode to color dodge and double click to the side of the layer to bring up the layer style dialog. And watch what happens when I uncheck transparency shapes layers. See that? See that effect that happens there? Transparency shapes layers. and then reduce the fill, not the opacity. If you reduce the opacity, you get this result. See that? But if you reduce the fill, you get that result. So now you can adjust the highlights that are hitting the glass, and you can make them as bright as you want. Totally up to you. And you can adjust the fill from this drop down as well. And before and after. And again, just adjust it any way that you want. Another way to see the before and after of a photo is by creating a snapshot. If you go into Window, History, you can click on this little camera icon and you'll create a snapshot. You see up here? This is where we are now. This is where we started. So original and Window and History. So original, snapshot. See that? It's another way of seeing the before and the after. So this is where we are now, and I think it looks pretty cool. And obviously you're free to go in there and adjust the colors and play around with the image as much as you want. As you can see, just by adding these little adjustments, you take a regular photo that you shot with your phone that doesn't look that great into something that looks pretty cool. And you can post that on social media and people are gonna be jealous of the drinks that you're having. Cool. Does JPEG to PNG increase quality? Not really. I mean, you might get a larger file size, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get more quote-unquote quality. You're stuck with the quality that you have. There's tricks that you can do to hide imperfections, to maybe enhance the look of the image, but you're not necessarily adding quality. So I don't know if that answers your question. Yes, there is a filter in Photoshop that removes JPEG artifacts. There's the newest way is by going into, might as well show that to you. If you go into Filter, Neural Filters, you can go into a section that tries to remove JPEG artifacts. Here it is. You can click on that, and then Photoshop will try to look at the JPEG artifacts. These are the artifacts that are created on the image when you compress it. And let me, since I'm talking about it, I might as well show you why that happens. So if I were to save this, right, and I'm going to use the old school method of saving, which is the save as for the web. You can access this by pressing Control Alt Shift S on Windows. That's Command Option Shift S on a Mac. And when you save a JPEG, Photoshop will ask you the quality. So this is basically the compression. When you leave the quality set to 100, it won't compress it that much. But if you reduce the quality, Photoshop will attempt to compress it, and you can see that the file size is much smaller, but you may get JPEG artifacts. And let me zoom in so that we can see that. See those little lines there? See how it looks like a grid? That is the compression artifacts that are created when you bring down the quality of a photo, or maybe that's how your phone saved the image. There's different reasons. The point is that when you have low quality in a JPEG, you start seeing compression artifacts. So if I increase this to 100, the artifacts are gone. And, you know, it depends on how low I bring the quality, you start seeing those artifacts. But the point is that sometimes when you download an image from the internet, or maybe you look at one of your old photos from, 15 years ago or something, you may see a lot of JPEG artifacts, and that's what the filter tries to remove. So that's what... and I'm sorry, I forget the person who asked the question in the chat. That's what they were referring to. Cool. Somebody said not the same drink anymore. Yeah, I guess no. I guess the old-fashioned needs to look a little more orange rather than purple. But if that's bothering you, you can always come back in here and just make an adjustment. You can use maybe the adjustment brush, and you can paint over the drink like so, and reset it, and maybe, I don't know, adjust the hue here. See, so I'm adjusting the hue to try to make it more orange. That could be one of the things that you do, or you could also reduce the saturation like so, and then through here adjust that color. I mean, there's so many different things that you can do to get the color back. Another thing that you can do is you can just simply use the temperature slider. So maybe adjust the temperature so that you get the orange color that it originally had. So the temperature and tint sliders. to make it look more like an actual old-fashioned rather than whatever purple drink it looked like now. So again, you can always play around with the image, or if you wanted to, you could also use a hue and saturation adjustment layer. Click on don't colorize it. Yeah, actually colorize might be good. So I don't know, find something that looks like the color that you want your drink to be, maybe something like that. And then with the layer mask selected, you can invert it and just paint with white in the areas where you want to color your drink. Something like that. Obviously, I'm going very quickly here, but you know, take your time with your image to get the color that you want on your photo. And maybe select color for the blending mode. Color takes the hue and saturation of the current layer and the luminosity of the layer below. Cool. How do you remember to edit the photo step by step? To be frank with you, I don't remember how to edit things step by step. I just, you know, like I think about what I need to do for the particular image, and then I think of the tools that are available in Photoshop to make that change, and then I try it and see if it works. You can, yeah, this will be recorded and it will be live as soon as it's over. Yeah, so as soon as the stream is over, you can watch the replay. You cannot export animated GIFs or video to a PNG. PNG does not support animations, so you cannot do that. Cool. And since we don't have a lot of time, let me now work on the image that was on the thumbnail for this stream, which is this one here. This is a house in Salem, Massachusetts. I wanted to say Salem, Oregon, not Salem, Oregon. Salem, Massachusetts, where they had the Salem witch trials, and I don't remember the name of this particular garden, but anyway, I took the photo again using my phone like everything else I've shown you today. And what we're gonna do is we're just gonna convert this into a smart object, and I'm going to go into filter, camera raw filter, and there it is. And what I can do now is just work my way down. This was a very sunny afternoon, so I do want to increase the temperature just to make it as sunny as I remember it. I'm going to also increase the contrast since the photo's looking a bit washed out, and I'll reduce the shadows as well to add more contrast, and maybe bring down the highlights so I can get more detail in the clouds and the bright areas that don't have a lot of detail. So I'll just reduce the highlights a little bit. As I've been doing before, I really want to increase the detail that I see on the ground, on the blades of grass, leaves on the trees. So I'll just increase the texture like so. And you can see how those pop much better. Maybe increase the clarity as well. And maybe even dehaze it a little bit. Dehaze attempts to remove any type of haze in the image. It adds saturation and it creates contrast in the image. That's why you saw the sky in particular get more saturated. And of course, I can increase the vibrance like so, before and after. And something that I want to do in this case, again, I want to create sort of a stylized effect. I'm going to go into the color grading options, again, go into the shadows, but this time, instead of adding blue in the shadows, I want to add orange just to make it feel warmer and hotter. So I can select maybe this yellow orange color and increase the saturation. And again, I'll increase it all the way through just so that I can see what I'm affecting, and control the luminance and the balance just to see what gets affected, and then I can bring down the saturation accordingly. So I just want the hint of that brown on the shadows like so, and I think that looks pretty good. The blue, it's a bit too saturated, so I can go into the color mixer, have the blue selected, and I can just reduce the saturation just a tad, maybe brighten up the sky just a tiny little bit. I think that the sky was just a little too dark and too saturated for my liking. I can go into the yellows, and if I drag this slider to the right, notice how the grass just becomes, or the greenery in the scene becomes greener. So I can just keep adjusting this accordingly. If I go left, everything looks warmer. So you're gonna have to decide what look you want in the greenery. In this case, maybe the warmer tone looks better for the effect that I'm going with. I can also go into the oranges and maybe adjust the lightness, and you can see how that adjusts the path. So maybe I can increase the lightness to just to make the path brighter. And I can go into the reds, and that will control, it looks like that house back here. So maybe I can make it a little bit darker, increase the saturation a little bit, and just look through all the colors in the image so that you can adjust it accordingly. I think this looks pretty good before and after. Also, when I shot this photo, I remember the sun being really bright on this left-hand side, and I want to enhance that look on this image. So I can do that. I can go into the radial filter and then just create a circle like so. Come here from the left-hand side. I'll reset it and maybe increase the exposure a little bit and add a little bit of yellow on the left-hand side like so. And I can press OK. This is before and this is after. I can go back in there and make other types of adjustments. For example, I can see if the geometry panel will give me a good result just by tapping on the A option. And it just rotated a little bit, so I'll do it manually. I'm just going to make sure that these two lines are straight, and I think that will help with the overall image like so. So before and after. I'll press OK, and you can see the image here. I think that at this point it might be a good idea to maybe crop the image a little bit. I'm going to go with the width and height resolution. I'll press escape to escape out of that, and I can just drag the handles here accordingly. Kind of want this to be right in the middle like so. Maybe bring this down right about here. And it's up to you how you crop the image. I'm just trying to make something that looks good to my eye. Maybe something like that. Maybe something like this. Again, you can spend more time fine-tuning it. Actually, you know what? I don't like to crop, so I changed my mind. I'm just going to crop this down a little bit. We have a little too much sky, and I think that looks a little bit better. But anyway, as you can see, by using Camera Raw, you can take total control of your images. Tonality, color, geometry, which means perspective. And by making the simple adjustments, you can take a very dull, bland photo and make it look amazing just by dragging a few sliders. To avoid compression when uploading your cover to Facebook, keep this file size under 100 kilobytes. That's true. Certain websites, including Facebook, if you look up their requirements for uploading photos, they'll tell you sometimes what files to use, what file types to use, how big the files should be to avoid compression. So that's a good tip there. Thank you so much for sharing that, Video TT. Cool. Let me see if there's any other questions. Thank you so much, Enocha, for that awesome comment. I appreciate that. So we have just a few more minutes. Let me see. You know what? I have one other image that we'll just do right now. We have a few more minutes, so why not go into it? So we'll try, let me see, which one would be better? Yeah, I guess we can do this one. This one is from The Vessel in New York City. It's an awesome structure. And what I can do with this one is, again, go into Convert to Smart Object, go into Filter, Camera, Raw Filter, just as we've been doing all along. Again, just in case you missed it earlier, you can do the same steps using Lightroom on your desktop, laptop, and even your phone. And what I'm going to do here is just start by going into the geometry panel, and I'm going to use the guided option, and I'm just going to follow the lines here just because I want to straighten the image like so. And I also want to make the top part straight, and I guess this bottom part straight as well, like so. And I'm going to scale that in so that we have no transparent pixels, and maybe offset it on the x-axis a little bit, maybe like that. And I think that looks pretty cool. And what I'm going to do now is go into the basic panel, and from here I can increase the contrast, just make that pop more, bring down the highlights to get more detail on the highlights there. maybe brighten up the shadows just to get this bottom part a little bit brighter, see more detail there, as we've been doing before. Use the texture slider to make that detail pop. Increase the clarity, which is contrast in the midtones. And what I can do now is go into the effects panel and add a little bit of a vignette. And again, I'm going to increase the highlights so that the highlights pop through that vignette. You can see the before and the after. Looking pretty cool. And what I'm going to do now is I'll press OK just to see how everything is looking in my overall image. So yeah, that's looking really good. I think that this one would be really cool if we added a little bit of a color grade. So I'll go back into the camera raw filter here, and let's first add a color in the shadows. So with color grading, again, I can go into the shadows, and since we have these orange lines going across, it'd be kind of cool if we added just a little bit of blue to make it stand out a little bit more, to make the orange stand out a bit more. So I can go into the blues right about here and increase the saturation so that we can see what we're affecting, maybe make it darker like so. Use the valence to decide how much we're going to affect, so maybe something like that. And I can reduce the saturation so that it's not so strong. So maybe something like this, just a hint of blue in those shadows. And I can go back into the color mixer and I can select the oranges and increase the saturation on that. Maybe increase the luminance so that it pops even more, and do the same thing for the yellows. Increase the saturation and increase the luminance, and I'll press OK. And that's my result. This is before. And this is after. And this makes for a really cool Instagram post. If you wanted to post it on Instagram, again, as a story at least, you would go into the 16:9 option and click on this option to swap those. And that's more or less what your story would look like, right about there. I'm just trying to center that. You can also use the arrow keys on the keyboard as you crop so that you can adjust your crop. And click on the check mark when you're done, and then you can use something like this as an Instagram story, before and after. So yeah, thank you so much, everybody. It's we got a few more minutes. Let me just see if there's no other questions here. Cool. Thank you so much. I'm glad you guys enjoyed the stream. What is the best? Oh yeah, we talked about that. The best settings for Facebook. Just look on Facebook. You can just type on Google like Facebook best settings compression, and it'll come up. Cool. Awesome, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I hope to see you again soon. There's going to be a brand new tutorial on Monday, 8 a.m. Pacific. So that's already scheduled for Monday. So the next new tutorial will be Monday. And also, I'm going to do another Photoshop training hour next week. I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure being with you today. And also, don't forget our sponsors, MSI. The link to the Creator 15 laptop, to the desktop, and the monitor are below in the description. Thank you, everybody, so much. And I'll talk to you guys again soon. Thank you. Bye, everybody.